Hi everyone, my name is Jaclyn Cowen and I'm a volunteer from Consecutivas, which is a non-for-profit research and educational organisation which studies past lives. And we study past lives from within the consensual paradigm. So that is, we put the consciousness, which is ourselves, the soul, the ego, the intelligent principle, at the centre of research. And therefore we accept the reality of multiple dimensions, we accept the reality that we have multiple vehicles, and that we have multiple existences. One thing that I'd like to say is I'd like to mention a principle that we use, and that is known as the disbelief principle. And that is basically don't believe in what you hear, experiment, have your own experiences. So I encourage you all, while you're listening to me talking, to maintain a critical sense, maintain critical thinking, don't believe in what I'm saying, and see if it has logic for you. Experiment and see if it has logic or it doesn't have logic for you. Some important concepts that I'd also like to mention in relation to the talk that I'll give today is Seriexology. So Seriexology is the study of past lives, and another important concept is Seriexis, so existential seriality, which is the idea that we as the consciousness had many past lives and that we will continue to have many future lives. And so we alternate between one physical or intraphysical life to a non-physical or extra-physical life before being reborn or entering into Resoma again and having a new physical life. And this process continues along our evolutionary trajectory. So, today I'm going to be talking about Carolyn Chisholm, and the first thing I'd like to say is to tell you why I decided to study Carolyn Chisholm. Basically, I had an experience in my Penta session where the name of Carolyn Chisholm came to me, and I'd heard of her before because she's a fairly well-known Australian personality, and I myself am Australian. However, I didn't know anything about her life, who she was, what she did. And so I decided to research her more. And while I was researching her, I realized that she was a very interesting personality and that she would make a very interesting case study in terms of a seriexological analysis. And so, if we can pass to the slide, the next slide, one back, please. Yes. Today in this talk, I will be looking at three different aspects. The one is I'll be doing a biography of her life, talking about her background. And the next thing I'll talk about is a Groupkarmology, so her within her group karma. And the third category, or the third item that I'll be talking about is the Seriexological analysis. I'll be doing an analysis of her. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? And also, before I begin this this talk and go into some detail with her, I really encourage you to please, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me, write in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. So, if we can go to the next slide, please. The next one, please. So who is Carolyn Chisholm? So she was, her name was Carolyn Chisholm, and before she was married, her name was Carolyn Jones. She was born on the 30th of May, 1808, and she died or went through her Resoma on the 25th of March, 1877. And her place of birth was Northampton in England. She was born into a family of 16 children. She was the youngest of 16 children. And in fact, she was the only one of the 16 that was actually educated, because by that time her father was quite well off. And he was a pig farmer. And she was raised in an evangelical religious environment and also philanthropic environment. So she was encouraged to help people. Both her parents were educated her to help others. Next slide, please. And so at 22 years of age, she married her husband, Archibald Chisholm. And she actually, before she married him, she basically gave him a condition that she would marry him if he accepted that she would, throughout her life, be assisting others. So she would be performing assistance and be involved in the public with philanthropy and these things. And she gave him 1 month to decide. And he did. He agreed to marry her on that condition. And in fact, throughout her marriage, he was very supportive of her. And he was really a partner in many of her initiatives. Then a couple of years later, Archibald first moved to India because he worked there, and then a short while later, she also moved to India. So he worked in the army there. And while she was there, she noticed that there was a lot of young women, young girls, who were daughters of poor soldiers who were not doing anything. They were just kind of left to their own devices, and they were picking up a lot of the bad habits from the soldiers. And she decided to do something about it and create a school for them. And at first she did have some resistance, but after a while she was able to establish the school, and it did quite well. And more and more people started to attend the school, including the wives of the soldiers. So they stayed there for about 5 years. And then, if we can go to the next slide, please. In 1838, at the age of 30, she and her family decided to move to Sydney, Australia, because her husband Archibald was very unwell, and he took a leave of absence from the army and went to Sydney. They thought that the warmer climates of Sydney, or at least the cooler climates in comparison to India, would help in the recuperation of him. And while she was there, she was very disturbed or shocked at the condition of young women who, there was lots of young women who had recently arrived from England and didn't have a job, and they were basically roaming the streets during the day, sleeping in the rocks near the harbour in Sydney at night, and were in desperation having to resort to prostitution or stealing. And she realised that she had to do something about this, and she felt this strong desire that she should do something. And so she created a home, an immigration home for these women. And what she did is she would actually go to the boats, the ships, as they were arriving to Sydney. And as soon as they came off the ships, she would collect them and tell them, you know, she had this place for them, because basically there was no protection for them. Once they arrived, a lot of them were single, they had no family, no friends. They were seeking a better life in Australia, but yeah, there was no one there to help them once they arrived. And so she helped them in this way. And so this shelter, this place sheltered up to 96 women at a time. And she didn't just shelter them, she helped them find work, because in Sydney there was few jobs, but in the interior of New South Wales, so that is the state, of Australia, which Sydney is in the rural areas, in the towns outside of Sydney, there were lots of jobs, and so she actually sent them there. And she created these employment centres in different locations within the state of New South Wales. At the beginning, the women didn't want to go, and in fact, she actually travelled with the woman so that they wouldn't be fearful and would actually get to the location. So she went with all the different groups, and there was a lot of young women, at first young women and then men as well she helped. If we can go to the next slide, please. And so just to give a little bit of a background about Australia during this time, it was the 1840s in Australia. And basically Australia was transitioning out of a penal colony. So it was a society in which they sent the criminals from England to Australia. And then after some time, they'd served their time and they became free men. And because there was a huge disparity between the men and the women, so there was many more men than women. And in fact, this is why they sent a lot of the women over in these government schemes, so that they would create this better balance. They'd balance the genders a little bit more between men and women. And so society at this point in time was, it included these kind of free, what we call convicts, these ex-criminals, and also now native-born people. And also the government was encouraging a lot of people to come to Australia from England, Ireland, Scotland, these kind of countries. They were attracting immigrants. There was a lot of jobs available. And so people would come to seek a better life. If we can go to the next slide. And so the government, to encourage people to come over, and including women and men as well, they had this bounty system. So the government would actually pay money to agents to send people over, but they would only send eligible people over. So they sent young couples and women under 30 years of age. And this had the effect of actually fragmenting families. So, so many couples would leave their children behind with family members, and then later would hopefully, they would be able to send for them, and all their grandparents. So it really, created split families. And this is one of the things that Chisholm was actually trying to remedy. She had great criticisms about this bounty system, and so she later on, when she actually moved back to England, she created an immigration scheme in which to send people over. So young children and older people and whoever else who wanted to come over to help reunite families. Okay, so and this included ex-convicts, so the wives of ex-convicts she was helping to bring them over, and to remedy this imbalance of genders as well. So when she was in England, she and other prominent people created this family colonisation loan society. So they actually loaned people half the fare, and the people would have to make up the rest of the fare for coming over. Okay. And she went back to England in 1846 and stayed there until 1854. And while there, she was really trying to promote immigration. So what she did was actually, before she went to England, she did a huge survey across New South Wales. And I would like us to move forward just to a slide which shows a map of Australia and New South Wales. And so you can see here how Australia looked in 1854. 1856, sorry, and New South Wales. So yeah, she did a survey within New South Wales, and she went to all the different households across New South Wales. I'm not sure she went through across the whole area, but at least the eastern part and a little bit further inland. And she wanted to know about the experiences of people. She wanted to show the people in England, you know, how things were, because basically what people were expressing, they were very happy to express how their lives were and how their lives had changed for the better. So it was a very positive review. And so she would take this information to England and she published some of these surveys showing people, look, you know, the people in Australia, they eat better, they have work, they're not living in poverty anymore. And in this way, she really helped to encourage and promote immigration. And this Colonisation Loan Society also managed to bring a number of boats over to Australia. So, for example, one thing that she also did was to help redesign boats, because she noticed that there was a lot of problems on the boats, and she'd had experience, you know, staying on the boats when she was traveling from England to India to Australia and back. And so what she did is she improved the boat conditions in terms of the privacy, so couples would have privacy from each other. Also, women would be protected. So she created a system where there was a respectable family that was looking after the young single girls, so nothing would happen to them during the trip. And also she created better ventilation, there was better food and more space for people. And in this case, when people arrived in Australia, they were in a much healthier condition so that they could pretty much start work straight away. And not only that, she significantly reduced the mortality rate of young children and other people as well. So, and in fact, she, through her efforts, she passed a bill, a government bill known as the Passengers Act, which from then on, the boat makers or manufacturers would have to build boats according to specific specifications. And so it greatly improved the boat conditions. So this is one of the things she did. So she stayed in England for those 7 years, and she gave lots of talks. And on immigration, her house was open to anyone who wanted to come, and she answered everyone's questions. She gave lots of lectures around England. She travelled to Scotland. She travelled to Germany and France and Italy as well, speaking about immigration. So one of the things about Carolyn Chisholm was she was universalistic. She didn't just look to help one group, so she really tried to help many different groups, regardless of the religion, regardless of the country, for example. And another thing I should mention is that when she married, she actually converted from evangelicalism, being evangelical, to Roman Catholic. And this caused some problems for her because in England especially, the majority was Anglicanism, and evangelicalism is a subsect within Anglicanism, and people were kind of anti-Catholicism. So it was a kind of a bold move what she did. Okay, so she, if we can forward through to the slide where it says return to Australia. So after she spent a number of years, 7 years roughly, in England, all of a sudden there was a gold rush in Australia. And basically there was no more need to promote immigration, so there was no need for her to remain in England. And so she came back to Australia because she really did have a strong affinity with Australia and wanted to remain there. And she came back in 1854. And while she was there, her family moved to Kyneton, Victoria. And one thing I should mention is that her husband Archibald actually came back before her a number of years to actually help with this immigration scheme and to receive people that were coming to Australia, and to organise the repayment of loans as well to the society. And the family moved to Victoria, which is another state in Australia. It's a bit further north of Sydney. And while she was there, she travelled along the gold rush routes. Okay, so the roads where there was the different gold fields. And she noticed that there was a lot of people that were just sleeping on the roadside, families, women, children. And she decided to do something about this, and she created these shelter huts within a day's walk from each other. And the shelter huts were basic structures, so really for people who couldn't afford to stay at hotels and needed a cheap place to stay, and with basic amenities to cook food and have a shower and these things. And so she created these shelter huts, and some of them are still existing in Australia today, not being used as they are, but as historic buildings. And so let's move to an analysis of her personality. If we can go to the slide of yes, strong traits. What were her strong traits? She was assistential and empathic. So basically her form of assistance, the way she operated, was that she received people, so she welcomed people, she orientated people. So for example, she orientated people, and then she referred people on. So in this case, she received women and other people off the boats, gave them a place to stay, and then she found them jobs. And this was, one of her characteristics. Another characteristic was she had courage. So I mentioned before that a lot of these women were fearful of going into the bush, which is a name for the Australian forest. It's called the bush. And they were afraid of going to the bush. They were afraid of the people, the bush rangers, and people there, and Aborigines, and getting hurt. So, and she would actually take them herself. And she took up to sometimes 250 people. So it was big groups of people. And so she had a lot of courage. Determination, she had determination because she faced a lot of resistance throughout in initiating and implementing her projects. Especially at the beginning, she had people thought she was trying to proselytize people to the Roman Catholic faith, and there were people that were quite outspoken. And for example, this one man, this priest, he publicly wrote a statement in the newspaper against her, and so it was difficult. She almost felt like I don't know if she was going to give up at one point, but some synchronicities happened, and she saw a young girl who she at the beginning she saw that there was a man with her, and she kind of saw that he didn't have such good intentions, and later on she lost her, how can I say, her reputation with him, and she was almost on the verge of committing suicide, and she saw her just at this point in time, and she helped her. She helped her not commit suicide, and so this was quite positive. But she did have this determination to carry on throughout her life. She was very determined. And resourceful as well, because the family didn't have a lot of money, and what she was able to do with a few resources, she was able to create lots of things and to accomplish a lot. She was very pragmatic, she's very practical. She, if she was trying to prove something, she always had evidence to show for it, and yeah, she was just very pragmatic in her approach. Ethical as well. She always had she was able to have a good sense of another person's character. She was able to judge them well, and yeah, throughout her life, she also didn't accept money from different groups, because she wanted to maintain her impartiality to be able to help whoever and everyone, basically. And she was independent and universalistic. So she was, regardless, I think she made a vow to herself very early on that she would help everyone, regardless of religious belief or country. And then we move to the weak traits on the next slide, or absent traits. So one thing that she didn't do was that she didn't look after herself. She was self-neglectful. And she, throughout her life, she really put the needs of others before her. And she even made a statement, she wrote somewhere, that she will do whatever she can to help the others, even to the detriment of herself. So there was her self-neglect. And I think she died quite early. I think she was 68. For the last 5 years of her life, she was really not able to do anything. The last 10 years, but the last 5 years she was bedridden, basically. And I think this was a cumulative effect of how she acted with herself. And then another thing was the neglect of her family. She had a family of 6 children, and she really did, she put her family in the care of nannies. So basically the nannies raised her children, especially in the earlier years. And yeah, of course, she wasn't able to be there for them. She wanted to be there for them, but she really felt that she was really needed in this work, and she had to be there to help these people. And she was religious, so she always viewed herself and her work in terms of God and God supporting her, and in the language that she used, and seeing things as evil and good, and so yeah, she had a religious approach to things. But she had this religious impartiality as well. Yeah, to what extent was she salvation orientated, wanting to save the world? And she advocated an idea of women and children being God's police. So this God's police is this idea, and it wasn't her idea, it came from the time period which she was existing, this Victorian time period, where they saw that women were more superior, morally more superior, and that they would help them, and as wives and with their children, would help to make men morally better, basically. And so she really encouraged, even though she stepped outside the conventional bounds of society and did things differently to most of the women, she still strongly advocated that women form families, and that they were good wives and domesticated, and that, you know, they were God's police. And so yeah, she encouraged this domesticity. But of course, we have to understand her as a product of her time. She was living within this context, and this is how people saw women. But yet she did things differently, so it's kind of interesting to analyse this. And another thing is, she didn't mention Aborigines. She mentioned them in the fact that they should be protected, but she didn't really focus any of her assistance to them. And she didn't really talk about the effects of colonisation on them. So this is where her limitation in terms of universalism came into being. So seeing Aborigines as a different group of people. And so it's important to also, as well as talk about her personality, to talk about the mesological influences. So the environmental context, the culture in which she was raised, because it did influence how she thought about things and the approach of her assistants. So I mentioned a few things like the English Victorian ideal of woman as being morally superior, woman as being domestic, staying within the private sphere, so having men within the public sphere going out into the world and providing for women, and women staying in the private sphere and really looking after the home and raising the children and cleaning the house. And so she promoted this. And then there was also these evangelical religious ideals that she also, that she had. And one of them was social activism. So this idea, a lot of evangelicals were encouraged to see social activism in a positive way and to go out in the world and do good things for other people. And that also that the wealthy should give to the poor. So she had that idea, and this contributed to her way of seeing things. Okay. And I need to ask you all, if you have any questions at this point in time, please ask me. So let's keep going. There's a slide on the benefits of Carolyn's work. And so really what she did, she performed the work that the government was not able to do. So she felt this need. And so it's interesting to understand that Carolyn, she really looked after the physical and social needs of people, the well-being of people. She giving people protection from the elements, and getting a job, and protection from exploitation, and having a better condition of life, right? Improved financial condition. But she didn't really, one of the flaws, she didn't really criticize the society which she was in. So she kind of accepted this mesological influence. But even so, these are some of the benefits of her work. So I mentioned in terms of education, she helps in the education area. She helped place 11,000 people in homes and jobs in the 7 years. She introduced the work contract. So she created this triplicate contract where she kept one copy. She gave one to the employer and one to the employee, and this was kind of new for Australia. And another thing she did is over the 38 years of her work, she assisted over 40,000 people. So she assisted a lot. She did. And then in terms of on the next slide, in terms of immigration, she helped over 3,000 people immigrate from Britain to Australia. And then she helped reunite families and redesign ships. And she established cheap accommodation houses. So let's have a look at her metabiography. So the metabiography is really what are the effects of her life in terms of the intraphysical effects, the extraphysical effects, her legacy in a way. So in Australia, she's known of, but she's kind of fading from view a little bit. She was, for example, on the $5 note, but she's been taken off. There has been a number of biographies written about her, and a number of schools and institutions named after her. And another thing is there is a movement to recognise her as a saint through the Catholic Church. However, they haven't been successful yet. Okay, so in terms of parapsychism, Carolyn, she believed that she was assisted by God in carrying out her activities. And so in what way was this an extra-physical perception? And also another thing which was interesting about her was that she was reportedly a water diviner, meaning that she was actually able to sense water underground. And this was especially convenient for people when they were traveling in the bush. She was taking large groups of people and then they needed water. And then she would basically, tell people, oh, you should dig here. And then she would go and do something else. And then, they would find the water. And so it kind of reveals a connection she had to the land, to nature, and this hydro energy and bioenergy connection, or perceptions that she had. Another thing is I have this hypothesis that, if we can move to the slide on the Proexis, that she had a previous intermissive course, or some type of intermissive course, because from a young age she had this kind of pastime where she would play with dolls in a wash basin, and she would actually move these dolls, which she kind of made in these makeshift boats, across the water. And she would have these two people of different religious faiths and families as well, and they would be arguing, and so she would make them reconcile each other and reconcile with each other. And so, as we can see, this was at 7 years of age. This was a very young age to be already thinking about these things. And so, in what way was her proexis already kind of defined? And so we have here a quote. I was impressed with the idea, and this is when she first arrived in Australia, when she saw the condition of woman, she felt this need to help. I was impressed with the idea that God had, in a peculiar manner, fitted me for this work. And so another thing is, she, in terms of Proexis, she wrote many articles and gave lectures on immigration. And if we look at the next slide, we can see a list of books and articles that she wrote. And we can see here, basically, the main focus is immigration, and also, immigration, colonization. So this was really the focus of her assistance. And you can see here in the middle, comfort for the poor, meet 3 times a day. And this is when she was publishing those surveys that she collected in Australia, and showing, this is what the people are eating, meat 3 times a day. They were in a better condition. And so I have a hypothesis that she achieved a complexus at the end of her life. And so we move to this analysis of a group karmic analysis, so within the area of Groupkarmology. And what is Groupkarmology? It is a specialty of conscientiology related to cause and effect that is active in the evolution of the consciousness with regards to the evolutionary group. So, what is the evolutionary phase in relation with the groups? So we have here, it's basically separated into these 5 categories, or 5 group karmic phases. The first one being interprison. So interprison is basically earlier on in the evolutionary trajectory or path of the consciousness. All consciousnesses basically go through all these 5 phases, and they start with this phase of interprison. And interprison is where the consciousness has these absolute ideas that they are correct, they act anti-cosmoethically or against other consciousnesses, but within a group. And so they think what they're doing is correct, and that they have every right to do what they're doing. And examples of these groups are, for example, the mafia. You can see this in society, or terrorist groups. Okay, they really don't have much regard for people's lives, and they'll do whatever they can to get whatever benefits they're trying to get, whether it's power, whether it's whatever. And the next phase, once the consciousness has experienced enough lives within the interprism, they move to the next phase, which is victimization. And victimization is when they start to doubt the correctness of their actions, and they move from a position of being, acting against consciousnesses to a victim of the same group, okay, that they were acting with before. And victimization, basically they need to repay their karmic debts, okay? They need to stay within this phase until enough karmic debts have been repaid. And after enough time has passed, they move into the phase of recomposition. And recomposition, so once enough debts have been paid, then they start to assist those consciousness or their former victims that they had when they were in the interprism phase. And basically they try to unteach what they taught incorrectly previously. But in this phase, things go wrong. There's a lot of resistance, there's problems, they move forward and they have problems, but it requires a lot of patience and persistence to be able to pay off again some more debts, okay, and to provide, to help their former victims. And so eventually, after enough time passes, they enter into liberation, and liberation is kind of like they don't need to assist anymore their former victims, and it's kind of like a relief for them. They're not experiencing this level of self-intrusion to the same extent. There's kind of a release in pressure, physical, extra physical pressure as well from intruders, extra physical consciousnesses, and they feel a sense of relief within themselves. They don't have that desire to kind of that they need to do something to kind of better their situation. They feel better within themselves. And then finally, and they have a sense of humanity, a better sense of humanity as well. They seek to help others and see the better of people. And then finally, we have polykarmality. And polykarmality is, the consciousness basically sees the planet as a school. They want to teach about everything they know, that they no longer suffer. And they basically start to experience in a more deeper way these concepts of maxi fraternity, polykarmality, assisting all consciousness regardless of their backgrounds, and the principles of evolution and things like this. Okay, so let's move on. So I would like to ask you guys, well, which phase, group karmic phase, do you think Carolyn Chisholm was part of? And basically, I see her as being within the recomposition phase. And let me know if you agree with this or not. Basically, the reason why I think that she was in the recomposition phase was that she felt a great necessity to help, and she felt guilt from not helping. She felt like she had no other choice. And there's a quote that is written here. My delay pressed on my mind as a sin. And when I heard of a poor girl suffering distress and losing her reputation in consequence, I felt that I was not clear of her sin, for I did not do all I could to prevent it. Okay? And then another thing is she helped to the detriment of her own well-being. I said that she was self-neglectful. And this is something that she wrote. I asked only to be enabled to keep these poor girls from being tempted by their need to mortal sin, and resolved that to accomplish this, I would in every way sacrifice my feelings, surrender all comfort, nor in fact consider my own wishes or feelings, but wholly devote myself to the work I had in hand. Okay? Another thing is she had a lot of resistance to her work, especially at the beginning. This is what she said. but it was his will, meaning God's will, to permit many serious difficulties to be thrown in my way, and to conduct me through a rugged path of deep humiliation. Okay, and then if we go to the next slide, then just one more thing. She placed the need of others above her own family's needs. And basically at this point in time, she was in the female immigration home. So when she first arrived to Sydney, and then she created that home for women. And she did have some children with her. And she was basically, because some of the other children, there were sicknesses in the home with children were dying. And she still kept her youngest child with her. And so she says here, a lady whose esteem I value told me I must not risk my child's life, that I must either give up the home or my selfish feeling for my child. I went in, and so then she saw that this child had died, and the woman was grieving for her child. And then at this point, she says, I went into my room, packed up my little fellow's wardrobe, and the next day he was at Windsor, which is the place where the family lived. This was the last sacrifice. It was God's will to demand. Okay. And so another thing in terms of Groupkarmology, there was some groups that her systems was more focused towards. And one of these was the religious group, and also the military group and women. And so with the religious group, basically she was involved in assisting people from all different religious faiths, and she was a strong advocate of this. And in what way was she helping to try to reconcile, different reconciling faiths and different groups from different religious beliefs? So she says here, know neither country or creed, but to try and serve all justly and impartially. Okay. And then we have also the military group. So her husband was in the military. She lived at a military base in India, and she helped the daughters of soldiers in India. The name of her horse was Captain. And because she was involved in the colonization process, which occurs through military imposition on another person's land or another group's land, this suggests that she had a past with this, okay? That because she was so involved in colonization, that she was involved in maybe not in such a good way in the past, and involved with military. With the military. And then the third major group of assistants was women. Okay, she really had a strong empathy, and she really desired to assist women, those women more vulnerable, not protected, and she also helped pave the way for women gaining greater rights. So if we can move to the next slide on re-urbex. So re-urbex, or extra-physical reurbanization, is the change for the better of sick, degraded, and anti-cosmoethical environments and communities which affect humankind, and which are sponsored by evolved consciousnesses. And so in what way was Carolyn Chisholm helping to contribute to this larger extra-physical reurbanization? Because what she was doing, she was assisting people to move from situations with poor conditions, for example, from England or other countries to Australia. She was helping people move from the city to rural areas to better conditions, improving people's lives. Okay, so we have another slide here which looks at, it's a Seriexological timeline that I created. And really, because what I'm doing is I'm looking at her life, her strong involvement with migration, with colonization, and I'm drawing a line back into history and seeing what possible events might she have been involved with in the past in relation to this colonization. And so yeah, it has a list of different events, you know, maybe the ancient Greek, being involved with the Crusades. And it's interesting with the Crusades because in her hometown of Northampton, where she was born, there was a church there known as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And this church was where she was married, where she was probably baptized. And this church was actually based on the church in Jerusalem, based on it's the main church where Christians will travel to, okay, which is the church, supposedly the place of Jesus Christ, a death and resurrection, things like that. And so, and this is in Jerusalem, and the Crusades was involved in reclaiming Jerusalem. So it's interesting, this kind of connection with the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Northampton. Okay, so let's move on. I created here a Groupkarmogram. So basically, as many people as I could find which had a relation with Carolyn Chisholm. And we see here with her family, so with her children, 6 children, and with her husband, and with her parents, William Jones and Sarah Jones. We also have a group of social reformers or friends. And so we have here people like Charles Dickens. So she had an association with him. He published, joint published some works of her and also published other works and wrote some articles related to her promotion of immigration. He was also a strong proponent of immigration to Australia, encouraging poor people and also, yeah, to immigrate. But it was interesting with Charles Dickens because he was quite critical of Carolyn Chisholm. He actually criticised her in terms of how her relationship with her family, she thought she was quite neglectful of her children. And supposedly he wrote a novel, Bleak House, and one of the characters, Mrs. Jelby, is a character where she neglects her children because she's involved in these distant causes, and she's so involved in these causes that she neglects her children. And he wrote this novel, and so it's assumed that it's based on her, maybe some other woman as well. But yeah, it's interesting, this connection. And some other people like Aeneas Mackenzie. He did a biography of Carolyn Chisholm. He, along with Samuel Sidney, Thomas Cooper, Douglas Jerrold, and Lord Shaftesbury. Sorry, not Douglas Jerrold, but Lord Shaftesbury and Lord Herbert. They worked together in the Loan Colonisation Society, okay, in England. And then we also have here Florence Nightingale. So she helped Carolyn Chisholm when she was in need, and she called herself, it's written somewhere, and we don't have much evidence to prove this, but it was written somewhere that she saw herself as a pupil and friend of Carolyn Chisholm. And Elizabeth Rathbone, she was a friend of Carolyn Chisholm as well. And then with these other groups, it's kind of, this Groupkarmogram is a work in progress. So there's, I'm still in the process of finding information. This is the information I could find in terms of religion. So for example, Carolyn Chisholm went to Italy, to Rome, and she, because her son was deciding to become a priest, and she traveled there to collect him. And while there, she had an audience. She met with the Pope, and yeah, he gave her a bust of herself and a medal. And then we have this other character, John Dunmore Lang. He was the person that was most against Carolyn Chisholm. He helped in, and this is why I put him in black, okay? So it's kind of, the others are kind of friends and supporters, Carolyn Chisholm, and he was kind of against her. And basically, he was the one who made wrote a public article in the newspapers against her, suggesting that she was trying to convert people to Roman Catholicism. And basically it seems like he was also heavily involved in helping people to immigrate, but he was more focused on Protestants, and so he was more anti-Catholic. And it seems that he was kind of jealous of the recognition that she was getting through her immigration projects. And then in the government circle, we have Governor Sir George Gipps, who was someone that helped her to obtain the woman's home in Sydney, and he was first against her, but Lady Gipps, she kind of helped a little bit, and over time he saw her, and he was quite surprised by her. He kind of thought he would be interacting with this older religious woman who was going to try and save his soul, but she came with facts and argued her cause, and basically convinced him to set up a home, although he didn't give any assistance, financial assistance. And also we have here Henry Grey. He was also someone, the third Earl Grey, that in England helped to send women and children after she kind of gave these public lectures. He supported the sending of women and children for free to Australia. And then we have here this idea of, if we move to the next slide, this idea of the Retropassword. And basically, what is the Retropassword? We look at these three different Holothosenes, okay? These three different groups which she predominated in. And then at the center of these groups, we come up with this kind of one idea, one word that kind of represents who she was, what she was doing in the past, and what she's doing now, and which she can carry with her into the future. And so we have here these three Holothosenes of religion, we have intellectuality, and we have politics. And if we go to the next slide, we can see with the religious Holothosene, I've already talked a lot about her religion. Another thing is, and within the religion, she would have developed this assistance. And another thing is she helped different groups of different faiths, including Jews. So she actually went to, in England, she spoke to Jewish groups, and they were actually strong supporters of her immigration scheme. And she sent over a group of young Jewish women to Australia. And she was also known as the second Moses. And yeah, I mean, it seems like in the past, she may have been moving from this idea of religious sectarianism to religious impartiality. And her sense of ethics would have come from the religion and her belief in being supported by God. Then we move to the next Holothosene, which is the intellectual Holothosene. She basically wrote the first book published by a woman in Australia, at least the first non-fiction book. And she wrote a large number of books, and she was very organized, methodical in her approach, and she attempted to always prove her case through evidence. Next, moving to the next Holothosene, which is the politics Holothosene. And she advocated for changes in society. So she advocated for different groups of people, the protection of women, employment, better boat conditions, uniting of families, also the unlocking of land. So she wanted to provide people with land. She advocated for this issue. And she did this through gaining public support, through writing articles for newspapers, by giving public lectures. She received a lot of support through this. Another interesting that she did was, and I mentioned this before, she passed a government bill. So she was involved in the politics scene, which was quite unusual for a woman of her times. And it's interesting to say that she was accepted. You know, maybe there was some resistance at the beginning of her being a woman, but over time she really became recognized, and people really supported her because of the benefits she was giving others. And some of the skills that she would have developed through being involved in this kind of Holothosene in her past lives, and also now skills of strategy, problem solving, implementation, argumentation, public speaking and writing. So if we go to the next slide, we can see here, before we get to that final essence or that final word, the Retropassword, we can see that if we look at both the religious Holothosene and the intellectuality Holothosene, between this I've put here the interassistential trinomial. What is this? This is her form of assistance that really characterized her. This was her welcoming, her orientation, and her referring. Okay, and so this really defined her type of assistance. Then between religion and politics, I put a moral reformer. She was very much interested in the well-being of others. And so she really tried to make society better. She really tried to morally reform it. And also this idea of a mobilizer. She mobilized people. She made things happen. She moved people from different areas. And so this also characterized her. And then between intellectuality and politics, I put resourcefulness. She did a little bit with, she did a lot with very little, and so she really was able to make a lot of things happen and achieve a lot. And then the Retropassword, I put migration, because this really summed up the essence of her, what she was doing, what she was about. She was all about this process of migration, migrating people. Okay. And so what are some of the affinities? In doing this Seriexological analysis, I would like to look at also what drew me to her, what affinities do I have towards her in terms of doing a research. When we're doing this Seriexological research, we look at this personality in terms of the complete picture of who she was in evolution, her strong traits, weak traits, but we also look at ourselves and we see what is our connection with this personality. Who were we? Like, were we someone that this consciousness assisted? You know, were we within the family, or were we someone who worked closely with her, or were we that person themselves? So this is something that is important to do, this kind of comparison. And so some of the things I would like to put here that kind of reveal my affinities with her is the fact that she was an Australian pioneer. She, I strongly identify with this idea that she came to Australia, she wanted to make change and to help society. And she was, part of this first group of people there. She also broke gender barriers. So basically, she went outside this conventional role that society really wanted her to remain in. And me personally, from a young age, I always had this strong idea within myself that this idea of equality, especially gender equality, and just being able to do and trying to do whatever boys were doing. And then this idea of universalism. So personally, I see myself as moving in this direction of universalism. And so I really have a strong affinity for different cultures. I feel very happy when, you know, I see people from different cultures reconciling and yeah, and having this harmony between different cultures and different religions and things like that. And this independence, so this is something that also I feel quite strongly with myself, is something that I was trying to achieve from a young age, moving out of home from a young age, and always trying to maintain this independence. Another thing is a strong sense of morality. And yeah, this is something as well from a young age. I kind of had this sense that I wanted to be, you know, ethical and things like that. And finally, the strong connection with the Australian bush. And so I've always, from a young age, living in Australia and living close to the Australian bush and always wanting to go there and have adventures. And I feel really at home when I'm walking in the Australian bush and going for long trips, you know, within the bush. And another thing which I would like to mention, which is not here, is this idea of migration, because this is another thing which this idea of migrating to different places. I'm living in Brazil at the moment, so I'm Australian, and my parents were immigrants, their parents were immigrants, and so I identify strongly with this Holothosene of migration. And so finally, I would like to put out some questions, and that is to ask you guys, and please feel free to answer. Is it possible that Carolyn Chisholm had an intermissive course following her intraphysical life, assuming that she experienced complexus? And another thing is, so if she had an intermissive course and based on her background, what type of responsibilities, what type of proexis would she have in her following life? And so if you were that consciousness, what would be expected of you from in the proexis? Yeah, another question is she part of the Consensuological community? And finally, was this her first life maybe as a woman for a number of lives? So maybe she'd had a few lives before that, but at some point, because of the specific types of skills that she had and the ability to move into the public sphere so easily and to interact with the other men and to organize things with them and for her to be respected by them, and to what extent had she already developed these abilities and skills in past lives as a man? So this is some final questions that I'd like to leave you with. I'd be very happy to hear any comments, any questions, and I thank you for listening to my talk.